Hi, and welcome to the Literary Sipper. This is Amber V.D. Hill, your host, and today we are going to go through the fall reading guide a little bit. Since we are midway through September, I think a lot of us are getting our reading plans in order, or at least taking some trips to the bookstore. Maybe when you go see the beautiful fall foliage, you stop by a quirky little independent bookstore. And then if you're like me, you're totally frozen with whether to buy that really super pretty edition of a book you've already read 1,000 times or something new or something the bookseller recommends. And it can feel a little overwhelming, which is why I made the reading guide, and also to stretch you a little bit into areas of nonfiction or poems that, most people don't really pick up a new book of poetry, but I'm encouraging you to anyway this season. So I wanted to just remind you that the guide is available not just on my Substack, but also on my website. You can go click on resources, and there are tons of things there for you. But one of them is the reading guide for this fall. The summer reading guide is also there from this past summer if you missed it, and also last year's fall reading guide. So if you are new to listening, you'll have lots of book choices there for you. And some of them are books that I'm planning on reading, and some of them are books that I have vetted and think are great. So if you ever have a question about that, please let me know. But the 3 fictional books that I wanted to focus on today are Hag Seed by Margaret Atwood, Signal Fires by Dani Shapiro, and Wellness by Nathan Hill. And all 3 of those books are powerful and books that I have read. And they are not light reading by any means, but they are certainly interesting and propelling and move the reader forward. And that's why I thought they would be really great for fall. So there's a little bit of challenge in the topics that they're covering, but the reading is so brilliant and so powerful that I think you'll really enjoy it. And I think you'll especially enjoy the audiobook of Signal Fires in particular. I think Dani Shapiro reads incredibly well, and I think the story is served well by an audiobook. But just a brief overview of those 3 in particular, because they were definitely 3 of my most recent favorites. Hag Seed I just recently finished. It is Margaret Atwood's retelling of The Tempest, and there are so many reasons that I chose it for the fall, but for me, I'm a completionist. I've spoken about this before. I really want to read everything that Margaret Atwood has ever written. And so that's what drew me to this book in the first place. But it's been one of those books on my to-be-read pile that I haven't picked up for whatever reason. It was never the right time or didn't feel right. And so I finally picked it up over the summer. And what I love about it, there are many things I love about it. One, The Tempest is my favorite of the Shakespeare plays. It's the final play. And the final act of The Tempest is, I think, incredibly brilliant when you think about playwriting in general and the theater in general and Shakespeare in particular. And Atwood stays really true to the allegory, and she stays really true to this idea of a modern Prospero and what that would be and how revenge might look and be serviced in a modern age. And she uses the prison system as a metaphor. She uses indigenous people as a metaphor. She uses father and daughter relationships in a powerful way, the ghosts of grief in a wonderful way. And it's a very short book with short chapters. And that's what I mean about sort of the propulsive quality of it. Because sometimes I think when you're dealing with a subject like a Shakespeare retelling, a long chapter can really make you feel muddled or lost or things are over your head. But these short, crisp chapters that are really written and vivid scenes allow you to move through the text at a very quick pace. And I think that's what makes it powerful as well. And I think for me, I just love any excuse to revisit Shakespeare because it's not something people pick up. Like, it's not like you're going to sort of decide one day, oh, I think I might want to reread A Comedy of Errors. No one really does that unless you are teaching a course or you're trying to write something that's specific to comedy maybe, or I don't know, but you're not really going to go to the bookstore and pick up A Comedy of Errors. But after you read a book like Hagseed, you just might. And at the very least, you're going to be curious about the performances of The Tempest that have happened. And there's a couple of modern ones that are really interesting. Julie Taymor did a version where Helen Mirren played, they called her Prospera, of course. And of course, the BBC has many, many versions of The Tempest. And I think watching it is a very powerful companion to a book like this. So you've got the modern retelling, the text, the original text, and then a performance of some kind that you can ingest. And I think with all three of those things working at once, it brings you to an understanding of the original piece in a way that you wouldn't have had before. And it just keeps it alive. I mean, and that is the wish of all authors, is that your book is kept alive. I'm reading a book called Dickens and Prince by Nick Hornby, which is really a wonderful book. And I'll talk about it at some point in the podcast, I'm sure. But the idea that Dickens is still being read and still being discussed in 2024, and he parallels it to another author of Dickens's time period, a peer whose books have been out of print for ages, and why some stories stay with us and stay alive. And I think the retellings are a lot of that reason. And for that, I think you might enjoy Hagseed by Margaret Atwood. The second book that I wanted to talk about is Signal Fires by Dani Shapiro. And now this is a backlist book. She has written many, many books. Inheritance is one that a lot of people loved. And she's been on lots of podcasts and lots of interviews. She's a brilliant writer. Her memoir is incredibly brilliant as well. But this is a masterpiece. It is a masterpiece of narrative shape. Time itself is the major theme, and she shapes the story in this intertwining circle of families and a singular neighborhood, and then writes them so that the beginning of the story is really the end of the story, and for one family, and it's the beginning of the story and the end of the story for another family. And you're going through these sort of concentric circles until all the families meet. And it's really a story also about how little we know about the people who live in close proximity to us. And in this case, even when we deliver each other's babies, how little we know about the families that are in our lives because they are geographically in our lives. It is the truest and probably most heartfelt description of the suburbs that I've seen in a while. There's not a lot of cynicism about it in the way that, Updike or Cheever's visions of the suburbs are so sardonic. It's hard to think most of us, don't have those sorts of feelings for the suburbs. I mean, we have this love-hate relationship. We love the bucolic nature of having green grass and having trees, but there's a provincialism that allows us to be shielded from the realities of the world. But also the competition to keep up with the Joneses isn't rooted in anything real. But this is more about what it is to grow up there and to always be yearning for a vision of perfection that doesn't exist, because lives don't work that way. And I love this quote from the story. It says, "They stay like this, two bodies, so at home with each other that it is as if each of them had grown and shifted to accommodate the other's shape over the years, like two grafted trees." And that is based on one of the primary symbols in the book, is a tree in the front yard of one of the families. And there are many references to the family and couples within the neighborhood in relationship to that tree. And the idea of neighborhoods changing and the stories sort of disappearing into the ether, and how we're all just sending up signal fires for each other to come home, to reconnect, and to engage in loving ways. And like I said earlier, listened to this book as well as I read it and listened to it, to have both experiences. And I definitely recommend it as an audiobook, and of course as a read, a general read. But it is wonderful. And like I said, it's an older book. So if you have not read it, go back for it. Don't get seduced in those indie bookstores by the best new bright thing and ask for this one. I'm sure it's on the shelves. It's one of those books that I think a lot of booksellers will keep on the shelves no matter how much time has passed. And I encourage you to try it out if you haven't tried it out yet. Plus, there's something about a suburban story for the fall. I don't know if it's school starting or something. There's a parallel there that I think lends itself to a certain kind of feeling. Maybe it's nostalgia, maybe it's melancholy, maybe it's the leaves falling. I'm not sure. But I really encourage you to read it. And the final fiction piece that I'm going to recommend for you to check out is a book called Wellness by Nathan Hill. I love Nathan Hill. The Nix is one of my all-time favorite books. That was his debut novel. Again, I can't believe it was a debut. It's along the lines of White Teeth. It's just brilliant. This is also brilliant. And even though it did not get the accolades that the Nix received, as far as I can tell yet, I think it's a book that's going to last a long time. I think it is the best book of the last decade. I think it might be the best Gen X book since Douglas Copeland's Generation X. I think it is a novel for the times. And he's defining our decade, all the decades as we go. And in this in particular, he talks about the 90s and then up and through today. And he really captures each zeitgeist moment from the sort of disenfranchised, grungy artscape of Chicago all the way up into the modern age of, iPads and Minecraft and the children that we're raising. And I think it is a magical story about couples, about marriage, about the wellness industry. And what does that mean to be well, to be selling ideas of wellness? And as someone who works in this sort of creativity sphere, it speaks to me about just being a willing listener when someone says the right thing. And is that the definition of wellness? So I can't explain to you how powerful this book is. I think that there are so many books out there, and it's really, really hard to pick. But if you are a Gen Xer, if you are someone who listened to music and loves art and really remembers that time when there was a freedom, a rage, a desire to break free from norms, and now find yourself living within those norms, living within that sort of nostalgic suburb that we were just talking about, this is a book that takes you through all of those passages of time. And I think also is a story about a marriage and a story about what secrets we keep within our marriage that we don't even realize we're keeping because they're stories that we are ashamed to even admit are true. So why would we admit them to someone we love? And I think that Nathan Hill, there won't be a book that I don't read of his. I feel like he's my completionist, much like Jonathan Franzen. I feel that he captures time and feeling of decade and generation very well. But I don't think that he speaks down to his reader. And sometimes with Franzen, people can feel intimidated by him. He's an intimidating personality in literature in a way. And I don't feel that with Nathan. I feel like he cares very much about his reader's experience, and he cares very much about the connection between what he's saying and how you're ingesting it, how you're going to carry it in your heart for as long as you carry his books in your heart. So one suggestion I have for you in the fall is to see who's in your area reading from their own work. Go on your local, live events and see if people are coming to read from their new books, or see if people are coming to read poetry. This year I'm going to Seattle Arts and Lectures and to see Maggie Smith, the poet, and I'm so excited. And there's been a lot of course, we're in Seattle, there's a lot of authors come here. But wherever you are, there are authors and they are reading from their books. And maybe they're indie authors at your local bookstore. Maybe they're best-selling authors. But there's nothing quite like that experience. And put that on your fall calendar to do, a little treat for yourself. The two poems I mentioned in the fall reading guide are Bride by Maggie Smith. Many of you know her poem, Good Bones. It was all over the internet. It was like her viral experience. And the other poem is a poem called Devotion by Ocean Vuong. And if you don't know who he is, I cannot recommend the NPR interview he did with Leslie Gross, which was amazing. And then also he has a Substack, which is a great follow. He is a very thoughtful writer and reader of his poems, of course, and reader of everybody else's work as well. So those are the two poems. And those are for people who may be just dipping your toe into poetry. I recommend them. I think they're very accessible writers where you don't feel like you're supposed to get it, that you're missing something. I think you'll feel something in your emotional self just by the nature of how they put words on the page. And, for those of you who are lovers of poetry and you're looking for ways to help people who around you sort of get into it and understand the art form, a great way to do that is to buy a book of poems that you love and mark the ones that you especially feel connected to. Just put a little bookmark in there for the person, maybe even a little note that says why you love that poem so much, or what words really jump out at you, or what images that leaves you with, or what it makes you think of. And then give it to the person you love. And I did this for my dad for gifts because fathers are notoriously difficult to buy for. And my dad was super into the Civil War and reading about the Civil War. And I bought him a book of Civil War poetry and found two that I really particularly thought were interesting and marked them for him. And then I bought him The Prophet, Khalil Gibran's The Prophet, and wrote two, bookmarks of why these two poems made me think of him in particular. And he passed away, and in his bookshelves, those books are there with his bookmarks. And there was something so powerful about that exchange for me that it still stays with me. And I think that was a great gift that I gave him, but also I gave him a gift of understanding me and why poetry is so important to me as well. So it's just something you might think about doing, especially in your gift-giving life. So the highlights for nonfiction for me was this book called Conscious Creativity, and by Philippa Staunton. I got it while I was in England this summer. She's a photographer, and it is a wonderful book about bringing daily creativity into your life and how to do it. It's a pretty little book. I am so not into nonfiction for nonfiction's sake that it's somehow more powerful or more meaningful because it's true. I think there are well-written nonfiction books and some that are just read like textbooks, and that's not interesting to me. Obviously, any book on creativity I'm going to grab, but this is an especially pretty one, and I think, again, could be a great gift for somebody. But I also just love what she has to say about looking with fresh eyes and looking at the world around you, putting it in a frame for yourself so that you can access it whenever you need to. And the second book is along the same lines. It's called Everyday Matters. And I am such a fan of Sketchbook School, which is Danny Gregory's weekly online art session where you just basically draw for an hour with him. And his book, Everyday Matters, is a sketchbook / diary. And it's the idea, of course, that every day with someone special matters, but it's also a sketchbook of sort of the daily life and the ordinariness of life. So it's Everyday Matters. And it's such a support for me. And it's a great reminder that the ordinariness of life is special. And when you capture it creatively, you are elevating it to its rightful place. And I also remind you that if there are creators that you love and support and you listen to podcasts or you follow certain people on YouTube or you go to see live music, like buy the merch, buy the album, buy the t-shirt, buy something that tells them, I like what you're doing, I like what you're making. And I encourage you to keep going because it's really hard, to just be shouting out into the ether sometimes and hoping that people connect. And that's why we do it, is to connect. And so if there's somebody who speaks to you, reach out and connect. And of course, I want to know what you're reading. I want to know what you picked up this fall. So please leave a comment and or a review. I am in the middle of James by Percival Everett, the retelling of Huckleberry Finn from Jim's perspective, which of course is brilliant. And I am so excited. Every page I'm reading, I'm excited to read. And I highly recommend it so much. I also just finished Dickens and Prince by Nick Hornby, which I also recommend. And I would just say, next week, September 22nd is the official first day of autumn. So mark the occasion, buy a book for yourself. And if you can, buy one for somebody else as well. And just to let them know that you're thinking of them. And I'll see you next week. Thanks for listening to The Literary Sipper. I hope you enjoyed this episode and learned something new. If you did, please subscribe and leave a rating and review if you're feeling especially generous. Until next time, keep reading, keep writing, and keep putting your voice in the world. It's waiting for you.